In today's show, we're talking Charlotte Hornets, a season preview. A lot to talk about with this team. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com. You can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok, at redrock_bball, and on Instagram, at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon today to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We are available on all platforms. Tomorrow should be the day that Basketball Monster is opening for the new season. I am hopeful this coming week to get out some non-team preview shows. I don't know that because I've been recording 3 or 4 a day at the moment. I don't know what I'm going to get out, but I'm going to get something out coming up with usage and minutes predictions. I'm going to get something out on points leagues versus category leagues. I'm going to hopefully get something out once Yahoo opens. Well, that's not true. Once Yahoo opens, I'll get something out on their initial rankings. And I am still working on my adjusted ranking system. I hope I can get it to work, and then I'll discuss that. So that should all be coming in the next few weeks, as well, of course, as the series of mock drafts, which will come too. But we're talking Charlotte Hornets here, so I might as well get the man himself in, one of the hosts of the Locked On Hornets podcast, Doug Branson. Doug Branson, welcome back to the show. Or should I say, Doug Branson, CLT King, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, you can call me that, sure.
Yep.
CLT King.
Yep,
yeah, that's fine.
I definitely won't.
I'll take that.
I won't sound it out, but every time I put out a graphic, I am absolutely embracing the new abbreviation for the Charlotte Hornets, and someone wouldn't go, bro, you can't call them that. What are you doing? That's not their abbreviation. I thought that was CHA. Nah, forget it. They've introduced it once. It's CLT now, for now and forever, for the end of eternity. This is the CLT team, and you're wearing the hat. And if you're not watching this on YouTube, come across. Doug is wearing the hat, and we are fully justified in our abuse of CLT. Didn't mean that to sound that way. All right, let's talk about the Charlotte Hornets team, which is a very interesting team for this upcoming season, Doug, for many, many reasons. And I think the overall theme I have for this year is underrated. And I'll explain it as we get through. Let's just have a quick look at what's actually changed with this team. A lot of changes. Brandon Miller's in, Nick Smith's in, Frankie Ntilikina just got signed, Amari Bailey, Leaky Black, best name in the NBA. They also drafted James Nagy. Now, let me just ask you quickly, is he going to sign, or are they thinking he's staying over in Europe?
He'll be in Europe. They've confirmed that. In fact, they had a press conference with the new ownership group, and there was a little throwaway comment about one of the rookies going back to Europe. So I don't know if he's going to land in Barcelona, or as I like to call it, Barcelona.
Yes.
But it looks like he is heading back to Europe.
All right. But this is also a team, Doug, with 2 absolutely unresolved situations. Now, the guys they have definitely lost, Dennis Smith Jr. has gone. Svi Mykhailiuk, well, he hasn't signed anywhere, but he's not on the team. Xavier Sneeder's gone. Teo Maledon played some minutes down the stretch. He's not currently on the team. But PJ Washington Jr. is a restricted free agent, and Kelly Oubre Jr. is an unrestricted free agent. I've heard not a single peep about that. Now, Oubre, I would suggest there's no way he's coming back. How do you view that one?
I agree. I think Kelly Oubre would like to come back. He liked his role last season, but that would not be his role this upcoming season.
It would not.
The wing position, right? I mean, after drafting Brandon Miller, you're getting Cody Martin back. Cody Martin, 2 seasons ago, Cody Martin and Kelly Oubre played this like hybrid 6-man role. You had Cody Martin for the defense, you had Kelly Oubre for the offense. Cody Martin gets injured pretty much the entirety of last season, and there were a lot of injuries, and so Kelly Oubre got a major role. So it's obvious why he wants to be back. And look, a lot of players come to Charlotte, and they like the city. They like the vibe. They like the CLT. And Kelly Oubre, I think you can count him among those players, but I just don't see there being any chance that he returns to Charlotte.
No, it doesn't make any sense at all. But the big one is PJ Washington Jr., restricted free agent, no movement at all. There was a little bit of movement. Maybe he was heading to Dallas. They obviously have got Miles Bridges back in the fold. Brandon Miller, who plays the 3, maybe could squeeze up to the 4 at some point. I don't know where Washington fits in. Like, where are we headed with this?
It's difficult to say at this point. I think I feel bad for PJ Washington in a similar way that I feel bad for Kelly Oubre, in that, players that are free agents off of several years of playing with the Charlotte Hornets have an inbuilt disadvantage among other free agents. We'll just look at PJ Washington versus a guy like Grant Williams, who Dallas did sign. Grant Williams has been tested in the playoffs. PJ Washington has not. And I think if you're a team that's going to invest a lot of money, even level money, in a player, you want to know that this player is going to step up when it matters most, especially if you have those kind of title aspirations. And so I don't think it's a huge surprise, even though PJ put up career numbers last season. I don't think it's a surprise that there weren't a lot of big time offers. It's been rumored that PJ Washington wanted something close to 18 million, maybe as high as 20 million when there were early extension talks. It seems like the Hornets are more around the super mid-level, so 13 to 15 million dollars. How do they bridge that gap? I think it's going to be difficult. I think the Hornets are hoping probably that as time goes on, that PJ will have seen the market and decide to take the long-term money over signing the qualifying offer. But Miles Bridges signed the qualifying offer, so that option still is there if PJ wants to completely bet on himself. But that's a big bet, because PJ's role, most likely, if everyone stays healthy, is going to be a bench role. It's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be a starter role. And so how do you make that bet on yourself without knowing that your place in the rotation is, really in concrete?
Yeah, it is tough for him. Restricted free agency is tough for everybody, and there always seems to be one person who gets left out a little bit. That did happen somewhat with Colin Sexton last season, and then he was in that sign and trade that ended up taking Larry Markkinen to the Jazz. It actually happened, I think, to Larry Markkinen the year before that, when he was signed and traded to the Cavs from the Bulls. So there's always one guy that seems to be left out, and it does appear that PJ Washington is going to be that guy for this year. We just don't know, and it does change quite a bit about this squad. I should have had someone else on this list, but we're going to talk injuries and suspensions. I'll talk about it now because it frustrated me no end last season, Cody Martin, and just the Hornets injury reporting in general. He played the first game and then was out with a day-to-day injury for about 3 or 4 weeks, him and Terry Rozier. Then he came back and played 2 more games, and then we just never heard anything. They just never updated us on anything, and that happened for Rozier. It happened for Martin twice. It happened for Hayward at times, and we had Gordon Hayward's wife, Robin, calling out the team for allegedly falsifying injury reports. What was going on with all that injury reporting stuff? Because it was a consistent problem all through the season.
I think on the Cody Martin front, it was a difficult, mysterious injury. It started out, he was ramping up in the offseason to get ready to play, and there were knee issues. And then those seemed to be handled by the time we got to the season. And then I think through handling that injury, then there was a quad issue. And I just think it was one of those things that sort of dominoed on him as he was, trying to deal with one thing, something else would pop up along that same, area, along that same leg. So I just think for him, it was just a difficult series. And then once you get into that snowball, I think at some point there's probably some idea of the player of hey, I've got to get this figured out, because if I keep trying to ramp up and come back to play when I'm 75%, I might never play again. You don't want to be in a Lonzo Ball type of situation. So I think ultimately, especially with all of the other injury context around the team, that season was doomed. For Cody Martin, there was no reason to really ramp things back up. But yeah, overall, it's frustrating to cover this team as well when the injury news isn't super clear. I don't really know how that compares to the rest of the league, if there is more clarity.
Oh, it's the worst.
Certainly within the
It's the worst.
Yeah,
of the
seriously.
league, without any question.
Yeah. And so, I don't know how they feel they're gaining an advantage, because it didn't seem like they really had much of an advantage on injuries last season. But yeah, it's difficult to deal with for sure.
Yeah, look, we just see it's day-to-day, or day-to-day, then doubtful, and day-to-day, doubtful, day-to-day, doubtful, just the same thing every day, and that happens so many times. It was frustrating for us, but I'm not saying I'm glad it's frustrating for you as well, but it's a universal problem.
Right, we have a joke on the show that if a player is doubtful under Steve Clifford, that means they're going to play, and if they're questionable, that means they're probably not going to play.
It's just
So,
trying to work out what's going on with the injuries there is a mess. But that brings me to LaMelo Ball, who played 36 games. Now, in the fantasy community, there are a lot of people who just will not trust LaMelo Ball now. They're like, I don't know how you can rank him this highly. I don't know how you can do this. But my counter argument to that is, the season was toast basically from the moment the Miles Bridges situation happened. And then Ball sprained his ankle, came back, sprained his ankle again by stepping on a fan's foot. Nothing, can't do anything about that. And then sprained his ankle again, which ended in a fractured ankle. And I think he came back a little bit too early from at least one of those ankle sprains. There's nothing in here that makes me go, oh no. Like, I suppose, and you associate it with, well, look at Lonzo on his knee. Ankle sprains are very different to a degenerative knee problem. So I personally do not have any concerns whatsoever about LaMelo Ball and this ankle problem, but he did have a fracture to end the season, so he's ready to go.
All reports are that injury is 100% healed, and he's in the process, and that was several weeks ago, and he's been in the process of essentially getting his body ready for an NBA season. And I think that's where some of the concerns start to melt away, is when you look at the fact that he has healed quickly. He's young. It doesn't seem to be anything structural. I would actually be more concerned about the wrist at this point, a wrist injury that he suffered when in his freshman campaign.
Yeah.
That almost cost him Rookie of the Year, but cost him multiple games. He still messes with that wrist and still feels like, I mean, he's mentioned that wrist as not being like 100% healthy, even as late as last season. And so I think long-term, that's more of a concern with me than the ankle injuries. But there's no doubt he has to find a way to strengthen up, to shore up that area of his body. Steph Curry had to go through that process early in his career, figuring out, what in the training regimen can I adjust? Obviously Steph added some equipment to his ankle. No indication that LaMelo is planning to do that. That's a risky maneuver. Could take away maneuverability, could take away what makes LaMelo Ball. So you always have to be careful with that. But I think certainly, hopefully, his training staff and the team's training staff is focused on making sure that everything around that ankle is as strong as possible to protect them.
Miles Bridges will miss the first 10 games of the season with a suspension that he allegedly already served 20 games of last season. And then the other one, we'll get to Miles a little bit later. Mark Williams had a thumb problem, which I was given the way that they'd handled injuries all season, I'm very surprised they let him come back from it and then gave him surgery at the end of the season. But again, we don't really have any concerns there with Mark and being ready to begin the season, Doug.
No concerns there. I think bringing him back was a indication that it wasn't, they felt like it wasn't a severe injury and probably was going to get a second look in the offseason. But, I think there was a needing to get more of a look at him, because remember, he didn't play for, majority of that first half of the season because they had Mason Plumlee, they had Nick Richards. And they didn't really feel like Mark Williams was ready to go game one. And so he spent some time with the Swarm, the G League team. And so I think from the team's perspective, they remembered, and in a negative way, Mitch Kupchak, the general manager there, remembers James Bouknight and Kai Jones not getting a ton of run in their freshman campaign. And whether that was justified or not is beside the point. The point is the team didn't have a firm understanding of what Bouknight and Kai Jones could or could not do against like NBA level talent. And they had to move that into year two. I don't think they wanted to be that far behind on knowing what they had in Mark Williams and what Mark Williams is capable of. And to Mark's credit, like even though that injury did eventually require surgery, he still had a good impact at the end of that season. And I think those were valuable minutes. And he's a young guy.
He's a young guy, and I'm pretty excited about where his future goes. We'll get into that in a second. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Football season is here. We're ready to kick off. In fact, we've already kicked off in the preseason, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you get bonus bets back every time that they win in the regular season. Not sure you get many bonus bets back betting on the Panthers, Doug, but you can bet on any Super Bowl winner Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you get bonus bets for every victory, whether that is, and then you can use those on over-unders. You can use it on money line. You can use it on spreads. You can use it on player props. You can use it on futures as well. So don't use the Panthers, but pick another team that's going to maybe win a Super Bowl, and you get all those regular season victories bumping back up. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. Maybe you could even put a bet on with those bonus bets on Rookie of the Year for the Panthers quarterback Bryce Young.
Okay, there we go. Now we're talking.
Might be able to do that one. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and don't forget to gamble responsibly. Doug, all right, starting five. It's really hard to do this because we don't know a couple of things. This is opening night, and let's look at LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier. They're going to be in there. Mark Williams is going to be in there. We've got PJ Washington. I'll put a big fat asterisk next to his name because I don't know that he's going to be on the team. And we've got Gordon Hayward in there. Now, Miles Bridges is not going to be available opening night, and you'll notice that there is a certain player who was picked at number 2 in the draft who's also not on this list. So, if PJ is not signed, do you expect Miller to start next to Hayward in that grouping?
I mean, possibly. I think Steve Clifford has a reputation of not playing young guys.
Yeah, it's earned.
And I think it's partially earned. He's played young guys when he's absolutely had to. I mean, he started Cody Zeller a significant amount of time his rookie season. Frank Kaminsky got a lot of, not necessarily starting run, but got a significant run during his freshman campaign, which was also a playoff campaign. I think it's partially earned for sure. I think Clifford does want to see rookies earn their spot, that it shouldn't be, this guy was taken second overall. That means that he absolutely has a spot, especially when your roster is laden with at least your starters are laden with veteran talent. It's not a team that has veteran talent deep into the 11, but, I think it does, with Rozier has contributed a lot to this team. Hayward is a player that they feel like is a significant part of them winning basketball games. So, I think it's going to be tough for him to jump either of those guys. But if PJ Washington isn't available, there's a guy, JT Thor, that Steve Clifford was very high on at the end of the season. That would be a smaller power forward, but certainly a guy that Steve Clifford trusts. So that could be a sneak name to jump into there in the lineup at the 4 position.
He's not that small though, because PJ Washington's not big. Like, what's PJ, like 6'8"? Like, JT's skinny, but he's not short necessarily.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's totally what I mean. And Steve Clifford did say at the end of the season, JT Thor has to get stronger. So maybe, we're not quite on Weight Watchers yet, but when everybody comes in, we'll definitely be looking at JT Thor and Brandon Miller. That's the thing with Brandon Miller in terms of starting him, is that at the end of his season at Alabama, he got mono, and that severely limited his ability to be part of that that entire draft process. And he came in underweight. And so, I don't know how much you can significantly add in terms of strength and weight in this short span of time between this, little offseason period here and the regular season. We'll see. But I think that's certainly a concern when you're talking about putting him up against the other team's best 5 players.
Yeah, I was going to talk more about this later on, but we'll do it now because we talk about Steve Clifford and rookies, and you mentioned something there about Cody Zeller, and I'm ready to fight because this is, you might have remembered something different, Doug, because I did research into this, worried, man, if the Hornets get Wembanyama, is this bloke Stephen Clifford not even going to play him? Because I went through the record of all of his lottery picks. Cody Zeller, as a 4th overall pick for the Charlotte Hornets, started 3 games, and he played 17 minutes a night. As a 4th overall pick, he did a very similar thing with Mo Bamba in Orlando. He kept Frank Kaminsky glued behind Marvin Williams as rookies. He kept Mark Williams as the 3rd string center.
That was fair.
Well, look, Frank ended up being bad, but they also didn't really ever try it. Mark Williams was the 3rd string center here, and I absolutely, look, if this team was whole and PJ was back and Bridges was there, I don't think Miller is even going to start on this team because Clifford, I've yet to see any example of Steve saying, right, I've got a highly regarded rookie, which he has had many times, and just throw him straight in there. Maybe Miller's a different story. That is completely possible. But he just has never done it. And he's actually done it, like, not even keeping them in smaller roles, just keeping them in, like, insane roles for where the team is. And a little worried about it. But I guess the absence of Bridges to begin the season, the maybe absence of PJ Washington, the ever-looming threat of Gordon Hayward getting injured at some point or coming into camp with a shit haircut and not getting minutes because of that, is one of those things could happen that might actually force his hand because the players... Oh, I guess you just start Cody Martin. I guess that's a possibility as well. There are plenty of things that he can do. Now, in terms of the rest of the rotation, there's Miller, Cody Martin. JT Thor was a name I was going to discuss with you because I'd heard this many times that he was going to be a regular part of the rotation this season, but you've already just confirmed that. Nick Richards, they did... Now, initially, when you replied to me weeks ago when we set this up, and you had Teo Mellett on there, but he hasn't been signed. I don't think he's going to be. So I just slid Frank Ntilikina in there. Do you think that he actually does get that rotation spot there on this team as that sort of backup point guard, even though Rozier will take that role? Or will they look at a Nick Smith, James Bouknight, or Bryce McGowan's?
I don't think they're going to look at Nick Smith Jr. after
chance.
that summer league display. No, I don't think he can't run an offense. Maybe he will be able to someday, but that summer league gave us no indication that he's going to be able to effectively run an NBA offense. I mean, that's what Teo Maledon provides.
Yeah.
I think over Frank Ntilikina is just an ability to manage an offense effectively. And Teo, I mean, to say he's a better shooter than Frank Ntilikina, well, I mean, everybody, I think any point guard that you could find is going to be a better three-point shooter than Frank Ntilikina. I mean, that's probably his biggest weakness. But Frank Ntilikina does provide you size, does provide you point of attack defense, which the Hornets desperately need. They're not getting much point of attack defense from Ball or Rozier. So having someone that you could replace Ball with for a few minutes and have that person be able to guard 1, 2, and 3, give you versatility, give you a one guy who could prevent a player from driving and going after Mark Williams. It's nice that they have Mark Williams now because they finally have a center that can legitimately guard the rim. This defense was apocalyptic when it was Mason Plumlee down low and Ball and Rozier up top. Now, I think Frank Ntilikina, that's his window. But the thing is, this was the same thing that happened to Dennis Smith Jr. The question when they signed Dennis Smith Jr. off of the, Walmart DVD bin was, can he provide just enough offense? Can he provide just enough shooting that you can, basically make a case to keep him on the floor because he is so valuable on the defensive end? And the same will be true for Frank Ntilikina. He's not going to take a lot of shots, but he's got to hit a couple of them a game. And I think there are serious questions whether he can even do that after that second year with Dallas.
Are they going to bring Maledon back? Because he is, they've tendered a restricted free agent right on him, the same as they have with PJ Washington. But the roster at the moment does have 15 guys on it, plus two ways at the moment. They also just brought RJ Hunter in to a camp contract. So that's 18 guys currently on the roster. Is that likely to happen, or is Teo heading back to Europe, or have you heard anything?
No indication from the team so far other than they've tendered the qualifying offer. And, there have been positive vibes from the coaching staff and in terms of what Teo can do. I think we would have seen more of Teo last year, but they were playing some of that funny, two-way number of games played kind of math that they were doing. So we didn't see him. We saw him a lot at the beginning of the season when they needed a little bit of help, and then he played in the G League for a while and then came back at the very end. I wouldn't be surprised. I think, I would hope that they would have multiple options for that backup point guard position, and having a guy that is familiar with the system that did execute it pretty well.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
When he was asked to last season. Yeah, I mean, I would hope that they continue that, especially after letting Dennis Smith Jr. go.
Yeah, I thought Maledon was fine. He was fine in his moments in OKC as well. He's never going to be a great player, but he was fine, and that's totally fine as well. Let's look at young players. There's a ton of them. These are all guys under the age of 23. LaMelo Ball is still somehow only 22. Brandon Miller's 20. Mark Williams is 21. McGowan's 20. JT Thor, 21. Kai Jones, 22. Nick Smith, 19. James Bouknight, 22. Amari Bailey, 19. And James Nnaji, 19, who's not going to be on the team this year. But that does let me talk now about Brandon Miller. Were you team Miller at pick 2?
I was not. I was team Scoot Henderson. I love the instant impact. I believed that Ball and Scoot Henderson could not only play together, but could play well together because I think their offensive games were different enough that they would actually complement one another. Whereas LaMelo Ball, he can drive, but he likes to pass more out of the drive than actually finish and get fouled. Scoot Henderson, loves to put his head down, draw contact, finish through that contact, and also hit mid-range shots, which LaMelo Ball, you want him not only at the three-point line, you want him several feet behind the three-point line. He extends defenses that way and allows for some of the crazy passes that he makes when he can pull a defense that far away from the three-point line. So, I thought they could have played well together. I think that Scoot Henderson is absolutely 100% going to be a star. I think Brandon Miller has that potential, but you are really you're betting on him, getting stronger and essentially flowering into a Jason Tatum, taking a similar path to Tatum. I think Tatum had a lot of the same weaknesses early in his career that I think Brandon Miller is going to have as well. And so we'll see if Miller can figure it all out.
I think there might be some extra pressure heaped on Miller, not only with the Scoot number 2 pick, but the fact of Clifford's reticence with rookies, plus the guys that are just there who are good. Bridges, Hayward, whether it's Washington, this is a team that people just think is trash, but these are good players, and they are going to play those guys, and they're going to push back up the standings. I've got almost no doubt about it. So Miller's going to, like if he came in and averaged 11 points per game on 40% shooting in 24 minutes a night as a rookie, I wouldn't be shocked at all. I think that's distinctly possible, just given the nature of everything around this organization, and then the pressure just gets heaped back on and heaped back on again. I wouldn't have picked him at 2. I had him at number 6 on my board, but that doesn't matter. It's in the past. He's number 2 now, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on him in this situation, I think.
Yeah, I think that it's not going to be a unique pressure, though. I think a lot of players come in and their role completely changes from college into the NBA, but it's how they handle that. Let's look at James Bouknight, for example. Did not handle it very well and was not being coached by Steve Clifford. This was a guy that Borrego really, it even made the general manager a little upset after Borrego left, that Bouknight was so stuck on the bench and in Greensboro. And Bouknight did not handle that well, and almost got into a physical altercation with James Borrego on the bench because of that. And there were some reports of some attitude issues in Greensboro as well. And so, that's going to be a big part of it. How does he adjust to that role? And just going back to the Clifford thing on the rookies, I do look at the situation with Borrego coming in. He promises to, hitch his wagon to Malik Monk, and figures out quickly that Malik Monk cannot hang at all defensively on the floor, and tries to give him a role and eventually moves him out of the rotation. You saw what happened with Bouknight and Kai Jones as well. I would say that the issues with this team and rookies is more of an indictment on the general managers, Rich Cho and Mitch Kupchak, than it is on Steve Clifford. If Steve Clifford had been delivered Donovan Mitchell, I just do not believe that he would have left Donovan Mitchell to rot on the bench. You look at the names that he has not played, and it's not like they've gone on to have all NBA careers after they leave the Charlotte Hornets. I just think it's more about who they've drafted and less about who's coaching.
Yeah, look, I think the Bouknight pick was bad. I think the Kai Jones pick was bad. The Monk one was Monk's definitely improved since he left Charlotte, but he hasn't turned into an elite star or anything like that. So I think, there's definite front office process issues that still seem, I think, to exist to this day. All right, let's talk Miles Bridges now, because obviously we had the whole situation last season, whatever under the table discussions were had between the Hornets and Bridges and the NBA to not sign contracts, all that stuff, whatever. That's done, it's passed. He's got this 10-game suspension now, but he very, very quickly picked up the qualifying offer. He just said, I'm taking the qualifying offer, which obviously gives him an implied no trade clause this season. It makes him an unrestricted free agent next season. They obviously couldn't come to terms on what he thought he was worth, and I applaud them for not saying, hey, he's $100 million straight up. That's totally okay. But with all of this, animosity is not necessarily the right word here, but reading between the lines, it feels like there's the communication or the willingness to work to move forward on that is not particularly strong. And with other options available, is Bridges they're just going to say, well, you're too good, you're going to start, or they're just going to say, well, we've got other guys, we'll try them out, and because you're not actually a part of what we're doing moving forward. How are you viewing his role on this team?
I think he's going to have a significant role on this team. I think this was an organization that before the felony domestic violence charges were fully bought in to Miles Bridges being part of a future big three core that also involved LaMelo Ball and player X. They didn't fully have that big three figured out, but Miles Bridges was a part of that. And I think maybe, I'm speculating here, but maybe that was part of why things ultimately broke down and Miles Bridges picked up that qualifying offer, because you had an organization that was fully bought in, and Miles was too. We were all ready to get to that place, and then it all fell apart. And I think there probably was some idea of like, hey, you remember what you said, right? I mean, yes, some things have changed, but remember what you said. And, they couldn't come to an agreement because ultimately there was no, just like with PJ Washington, for different reasons, there was no significant market in the NBA for Miles Bridges I think because of those charges, but I also think there's this other thing that isn't talked about a lot, which is that he missed an entire year of basketball. And not because of injury, but at the same time, I don't know what that really does to a player. How ready has he stayed? I'm sure the team has some indication of it. He's posted a lot of videos of him working out, but at the same time, working out is not playing an 82 game season. And it's not, I don't think the game has passed him by or anything like that. The game hasn't changed significantly over one season. But it will be interesting to see, how he moves through the preseason process, the training camp process. I think the team would do themselves a service of like fairly evaluating where Miles Bridges is now, not where they thought he would be or where he was when they were ready to give him close to the max contract, but who he is as a player now. I think he's got to go through that same evaluation. And if they come through that and go, oh, nothing's changed, he's still the high flying, dunking, needs to improve his 3-point shot, needs to not fall asleep so much on defense, but generally a guy that you can, for several possessions, put on the best wing player of another team and feel fairly confident, at least on ball, that he's going to provide you with some good attack defense. If he's that same player, then fine. You move forward with him as the starting three or the starting four. You go Hayward, Bridges, and I think he has a significant role. But I think they have to go through that process.
Michael Jordan has now sold his majority stake in the team. He still is a minority owner. Gabe Plotkin, and Rich Schnell. Plotkin, sorry. Rich Schnell are the two guys coming in to take control. But we heard reports of this, Doug, that Jordan was still involved and he was the one making the final call on the Brandon Miller draft choice. Number one thing, is this team going to, I guess, broaden some of its horizons in terms of we're only getting players who played for blue blood college programs or executives who were mates with Jordan back in college? How much of an influence does Mike still have with the decision making on this team? Because again, that draft pick thing was very, very strange. And what else can new ownership do here to change the direction of a team that's got a lot of good players and should have a bright future, but has always seemed to be dragged back down by some of the higher up decision making?
It's going to be very interesting because Plotkin already had a minority investment in the team and got that via his relationship with Michael Jordan. And so there is that connection there. And then Rick Schnall, in the latest press conference that they did, mentioned his connection and past connections with and respect for Michael Jordan. And there was a lot of, I think, talk that served the purpose of making this an understanding that this was not, an Ishbia in Phoenix situation where you're taking over for an owner that everybody hated. And so I'm going to come in and just do everything differently and, completely separate myself from the past guy. That's not what the situation is right now. But I think everybody's talking nice right now. Eventually, Schnall and Plotkin are going to have to figure out ways of making this their team, their era. Because I think Michael Jordan, over the past, 5 to 7 years, his interest in directly managing the team has really waned. I think he is super interested in being a NASCAR owner and some of the other sports ventures that he's gotten into. He's just a different Michael Jordan than he was when he first got the majority stake in the team. When he first bought the Bobcats from Bob Johnson, he was suiting up and like going down to the practice court to show the guys what's what because he didn't like the way they were playing, right? That was the most active you could be as an owner. And he was not that guy in the last couple of years. You didn't see him around many games. And so I just don't think, I think he'll be around. And if they want to consult him, they can. But I don't see this as a situation where Mike's going to like call up Plotkin and Schnall every day and be like, yeah, what are you guys thinking? Who you think you're going to fire the GM? Yeah. What are you going to do? Now, I don't think it's going to be that situation. It's up to Plotkin and Schnall to separate themselves. Now, in terms of what they can do, I really think that you're right, that this team does have a good core, and Plotkin and Schnall believe that as well. They like the young players that this team has. Where I think they can make the most impact is actually investing in some of the other things that have, I think, resulted in a reputation of Charlotte around the league as cheap. So it's player accommodations, it's practice facility. They've got to build a new practice facility that's a standalone facility that's state of the art. The one that they have now is attached to the arena. It's the original practice facility when the arena was built. And so there's already improvements in the works. This was under Michael Jordan for the arena itself. I think they've got to just invest in all of those other areas so that when this team eventually, hopefully, please God, wins something in the playoffs, that you have all these other things where if you're trying to convince a player, whether it's trading for that player and convincing them to stay or trying to get a free agent, that you can say, hey, I know what the organization used to be like. And we're not going to say this publicly, but it was cheap. But that's not how we run things anymore. That's not how old Plotkin and Schnall do it. And so, I think that's where they can make the most impact over the next 5 years.
It is going to be really interesting because the other thing with obviously Michael Jordan's a legend, we know that, but he's not a Hornets legend. Like didn't play for Charlotte. Yes, he went to college in Carolina, but this is not like he's owning the Bulls and we go, well, we can't actually go against Jordan because man, nothing would be here without him. It's like he just there's and I was talking to someone about this the other day. There's a little bit of this aura of just like, well, if Jordan says, we go, oh, I guess it's Jordan, but he's not a Hornets legend. He's not. Like he never played there. He just jumped in as an owner. Like so, there is this aura that's also like. Do we care if we piss him off? It looks like, oh man, what happens when we have championship reunions? Doesn't matter. Look, Jordan's not a part of it. Like he's just it's just a weird, it's a whole weird thing that I just get this fear of people just saying, yes, Mike, yes, you do whatever, whatever.
Yeah, it's not just that he's not a Hornets legend. It's actually, if you look at the history of it, he's actually like one of the Hornets' arch enemies. Like he ended the runs of some of the better opportunities that those LJ Zoe teams had at, getting a little bit further in the Eastern Conference. Certainly, because Michael was there. Anytime Michael was there, the Hornets were not going to be championship contenders. But they had an opportunity to get a little further in the playoffs than they did, but they didn't get that opportunity because Michael Jordan broke them in half. And so, but he is a North Carolina basketball legend. And the majority of that state cheers for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, my alma mater. There are a lot of passionate Duke fans as well. They just all happen to live in New Jersey. And they came and went to college and then went back to Jersey. Okay. The people that are in North Carolina, they went to Chapel Hill. They worship Michael Jordan. And so, and you also have to remember this, that Michael Jordan did invest a lot. He didn't invest enough money, I think, in the running of the organization, but he invested a lot of money in the community. He built medical facilities in areas of Charlotte that desperately needed them, that were not getting enough attention financially from the city. Philanthropically, he stepped in to fill a lot of gaps. And so he did a lot, around when Charlotte lost the All-Star game, he was adamant, against HB2. And he's just done a lot of things, both word and opening his wallet, that I think meant a lot to the community. And so the general sentiment was, man, Michael didn't do enough winning, didn't do enough investing in certain areas, maybe got a little too involved in some of these draft picks, but he actually cared about Charlotte. And owners don't have to do that. He wasn't obligated to do that. And he did it. And he has to get some credit for that.
Yeah, they're all 100% fair points. Now, who's a breakout candidate on this team, Doug?
Brandon Miller. I think Brandon Miller has an opportunity to come in and shoot the lights out. This team needs shooting. They did not shoot the basketball well. Even like if you just remove the injury context, this was a team that I think lost a lot of the shooting magic that they had under Borrego. And so they've got to refine that. And I think Brandon Miller is going to be a big part of that. And I think Brandon Miller is going to have a role similar to what Miles Bridges had his rookie season, which is guy on offense, at least guy who stands in the corner. There's going to be a lot of action around him. LaMelo Ball is going to draw a lot of attention, and the ball is going to find him open. And can he knock it down? Bridges and the opportunities that he got from the corner his rookie season, he did knock them down, and it led to an expanded role. I think you're going to see a similar thing for Brandon Miller in the first half of the season, and then probably by the end of the season, I do expect him to have either a sixth-man significant minutes role or a starting role, and so I think he's absolutely a breakout candidate.
Who's a regression candidate then?
Regression candidate, I mean, other than what I mentioned with Miles Bridges, and if you look back at his stats, he was the leading scorer by just a tenth of a point, but he was technically the leading scorer of that team 2 seasons ago. So just being off the floor for a year, do those stats significantly decline? I think there's some question marks there. And then Terry Rozier, he's constantly in trade discussions, trade rumors. He hasn't let it affect his game to this point. I think if you look at last season's numbers, there were some regressions, and that was mainly due to the fact that he was playing out of position, he was playing point guard. If you do get another injury to LaMelo Ball, if that ankle doesn't hold up, if the wrist injury pops back up, then I think Terry Rozier's numbers continue to fall because he's not a point guard. They keep trying to play him at point guard for significant minutes, and it hurts his numbers across the board, hurts his shooting. So I think definitely a regression candidate there, because remember, they're not going after this backup point guard position. Frank Ntilikina, with all due respect, is not an answer. Teo Maladone, as much as I like him, is not an answer. And if you're a team that's not serious about contending, then you might as well not invest in the position that if your starter gets injured, your season's over anyway. Like, I kind of understand that if you're not serious about contending, if this is just one more transition year as this new ownership group gets a look at what they have and don't have. But at the same time, if LaMelo Ball, and I'm not even talking about significant injury, I'm talking about what if he misses, I would say 10 to 15 games, and they play Terry Rozier significant minutes at the point guard position. There's no doubt that's going to hurt his numbers. We have the evidence.
Yeah. Who's the most likely player to be traded?
Terry Rozier, I think, because I think Gordon Hayward, even though he's on the expiring contract, I think too many people are scared about the injury concerns. I think some people, if LaMelo stays healthy and Terry plays the shooting guard position, I think he still could refine that form that he had 2 seasons ago when he was shooting the basketball a lot better. And I think a team that needs a little bit of extra shooting, every year that his contract gets a little bit closer to expiring, he's going to look a lot more attractive if his shooting numbers hold up. So I think he's still in the running as a tradable asset. Gordon Hayward, I think this team just holds on to him and lets that money fall off the books and uses that cap space elsewhere.
Let's look at our season win projections, because last season, again, people just think this team's an absolute no-hope team with no future. They're dreadful again. Yeah, they got the number 2 pick in the draft, but they were 27-55. That's 10 wins more than the Pistons. They had negative 6.2 net rating, 27th. They had no Bridges. Ball barely played. Everyone was hurt. I think they're going to be really good this season. Well, not really good. Much, much better. In fact, amazingly, I'm projecting more wins for them than you are, Doug. FanDuel has them set at 30.5 wins, which honestly, it feels like free money. That's 3 more wins than last season. I don't understand how they're expecting. Look, this is a team that, with basically the same roster, but an older, more experienced LaMelo Ball, was like a 37-38 win team for 2 years in a row and gotten better those two years. You've got them at 34-48. I've got them at 37-45. If they're more likely to me to hit 40 than they are to be at 30 wins. I just think that they are being significantly underrated. There's no context being applied to what happened last season, and and their defense, actually, talk about their defense. Their defense the second half of last season was actually really good. And I think that might surprise a lot of people.
Yeah, if you want to make the case that they are going, so my win total was 34. If you want to make the case that they're going to close in on 40 or even, match what they had 2 seasons ago when they lost in the play-in and get closer to 43, that if you want to make that case, then you want to go look at the stats a little before the All-Star break into when LaMelo Ball fractured his ankle. Like if you just look at that period of time, you go, wow, the offense was humming. They started to shoot the basketball a lot better. LaMelo looked like an all NBA player, like looked like the guy, that was going to make the sort of Ja Morant level leap. And had it started on game one, then maybe we would be talking about LaMelo Ball like that right now. But if you look at those stats, the defense came together, and that's the biggest question. Can Steve Clifford, somebody that has gotten teams in Charlotte that weren't necessarily built for defense, to buy into a defensive scheme that made up for some of those deficiencies? Can he get those players to buy in? And I think because of the injuries so early in the season, you never really got that experiment until much later in the season. You never got to see the results of that experiment until much later in the season. That's going to be the big question. The reason I have it at 34, I think 30.5 is ridiculous as well. The reason I have it at 34 is because I look at the depth issues. I look at injury concerns that are still lingering. I look at the situation with PJ Washington, not locking him up in some way and coming to some middle ground where you shore up your bench scoring with PJ Washington. You leave for what feels like the 40th consecutive season. You leave the backup point guard position rail thin, and you go bargain hunting for that position after you struck gold with Dennis Smith Jr. I mean, you did that, and then you didn't make him a priority. Instead, you say, hey, well, we did it once, we'll do it again. They felt that same way about Jeremy Lin, because they struck gold with Jeremy Lin, and that was part of why they went to that playoff series. And then they tried to replicate that same success and let Jeremy Lin go, and couldn't find that same success. And so, I look at all of that and I go, man, one or two major injuries. I'm not even talking about LaMelo Ball, but just one or two major injuries, and this season could be headed for another disaster, because this team is the same team that they were, really just in terms of roster construction, is generally the core is the same core as when they got blown out of 2 play-in games, and they, allowed the injuries to let that season fall apart last season. It's not a team that I've seen evidence is extremely resilient. And so until I see that evidence,
it's fair enough. Yeah.
I just feel reticent about predicting 40 games or 38 or whatever.
Now, Doug, it's time for us to play a game. We're going to do a Hornets grid. We had a bit of a discussion off air about some of our struggles sometimes at doing the grids, and just trying to remember these guys and you're really fixated on a single name that you might think of. So we got the Hornets Spurs, Hornets Bulls, Hornets Jazz, Hornets Nets, Hornets Pelicans, and then the last one is someone who made the All-Star game playing for the Hornets. Now, this is original Hornets. It is Bobcats, and it's new Hornets. It's not the New Orleans franchise. So once they moved, that all goes to them. So we're talking original Hornets and then the Bobcats Hornets in the second iteration of this franchise. So what we're looking at, again, you're looking for a player to play for both teams, but what we want to do is find, because we can't do rarity scores because it's only you playing this game. So what we're going to do is find who the player was that played the fewest games, and that gives you the best score. So they're going to play the fewest games, not overall. You look at both the games they played for both teams, so it's whether it's Hornets, Spurs, and if one of them's at 100 and one of them's at 2, then that 2 counts. And I'll rank those lowest games played against everyone else in that category to get you a score. Make sense? I hope so. I don't think I explained that very well, but I hope it makes sense.
Okay, I think so.
All right.
And I think I already had a name in mind for Hornets Spurs, and I think it's going to damage me, because the first name that came to mind is the guy that's going into the Hall of Fame, and I hope he goes in wearing a Charlotte Hornets jersey, and that's Tony Parker.
Ooh, wow, okay, that's not a bad score. Wow, imagine if he comes in a Hornets jersey. It'd be one of the funniest things ever. It's never going to happen. He played.
No, it's not. No,
he played only 56 games for Charlotte. He played 1,198 for the Spurs. That's not a bad score. You get a 21.24 for that one for Tony Parker. I tell you what, let me tell you a funny name of one would have been a good pick there. Matt Carroll played 3 games for the Spurs. Who else was a good one? There's not many other really interesting, funny. Devontae Graham would have been one, because he played 20 games for the Spurs last season after that trade, of course. And Shannon Brown played 10 games for the Spurs and 30 for the Hornets. It would have been a good one. All right,
Bobcats legend.
Which one do you want to go for now?
Bulls, and I'm going to do B.J. Armstrong.
Oh, that is
Go original Hornets.
That is good.
And was featured in The Last Dance.
Yes, he was. But amazingly, he actually is one of the highest score. No, he's not that high. Actually, 42.68 for BJ Armstrong there, because he played obviously a lot with the Bulls, but he played 72 with the Hornets, which isn't a huge amount. The problem is there is so many of these random guys playing half seasons and 20 games between the two teams. And I'm just going to pick out some interesting names there. AC Law played 9 games for the Hornets and 12 for the Bulls. That's one. Shannon Brown, 6 for the Bulls. He's on that list. Who else do I know on this list that's an interesting option? Larry Hughes with his 14 games for the Hornets. That's another name there. All right, so we've got BJ. What are we doing next? Jazz, Nets, Pelicans, All-Stars?
Let's do Jazz.
This is really tough because there is 18 players in history that have played between these two franchises. That's probably the lowest I've seen out of everyone that I've done.
I might get this. I might just completely X this one out. And this is what I hate about the grid game, is that if you miss,
oh yeah, hate it.
As I kind of just go off from the dome here, I'm pretty sure that Marvin Williams played with the Jazz in between playing for the Hawks and the Hornets.
Marvin Williams 100% did. He played quite a bit, but he did play there. He played 429 for Charlotte and 139 for Utah. So you don't lose the square completely. But I tell you who would have been a very good one, who was actually a member of the Hornets last season, Xavier Sneed. Played 4 games for the Hornets and 7 for the Jazz. Or Shelvin Mack with his 4-game Hornet career as well.
That would have been a good one.
He would have been good. Now, they
attack.
They haven't had many players, but most of the guys we know, Del Curry, Boris Diaw, Ricky Green, Gordon Hayward, of course, Al Jefferson, Brevin Knight, Shelvin Mack, Kelly Trippier, Mo Williams as well. Yeah. All right. Nets, Pelicans.
Let's go Pelicans. This will be, because
what an interesting
the Hornets became the New Orleans franchise.
Mm-hmm.
This was.
I'll go. I randomized this, and this is what came up. I couldn't have come out any more perfect.
Yeah, it's the easiest one, but I'm going to try to think of a player that in that transition that maybe didn't play a lot for either team. And I'm going to go. This is probably not the best answer, but there were 2 players that were nicknamed. We're doing on Locked On Hornets. We're doing top 35 nicknames, Charlotte Hornets nicknames or Charlotte franchise player nicknames. And so here's a fun fact that the Hornets in that final season, moving into the first season for the New Orleans Hornets, had 2 players that were nicknamed the Big Cat. One was PJ Brown, and then they drafted Jamal McGlure in that final Hornets season, and he was also nicknamed the Big Cat. So they had a couple of Big Cats coming up. So I'll go with McGlure, hoping that he didn't play a ton with New Orleans after they moved.
Jamal McGlure is clearly a correct answer. Unfortunately, he did play quite a bit. You get a 75.24 there. He played 156 for Charlotte and 187 for New Orleans. I tell you a good one you could have dropped in there. Christian Wood played 13 for Charlotte and 8 for New Orleans. That would have been a pretty good score. What about Lance Stevenson, who had 6 games for the Pelicans at some point? I've got no idea when that happened. And they're probably the 2 best, most random ones that I can see on there. Who's this bloke? Jerome Moiso. Never heard of that guy. But anyway, apparently he played for both teams. All right, Nets, or you want to do the All-Stars, which is a very small list as well.
Oh gosh, the Nets. The Nets. This is where I'm getting this classic grid block. I'm trying to think of Nets Jeremy Lin couldn't have played a ton of games with the Nets because he got injured as soon as he left the Hornets and went for the Nets. So I'll go Jeremy Lin.
It's a really, really good pick. Jeremy Lin did not play a huge amount of games for the Nets. He played 37, in fact. So that's a 13.58 for Jeremy Lin. With other guys on that list, who else do we have on that list that's worth looking at? Earl Boykins, he's there. What else? There's some names I've literally never heard. Tony Massenberg is on there.
Tony Massenberg. He didn't play a ton with those original Hornets, but played in the early going.
How much do you remember Noah Vonleh's 4-game appearance for Brooklyn? Because I don't remember a single second of it.
I just remember him getting drafted, and then very quickly there were loud whispers that Vonleh just didn't. This has shocked me because when I first started covering the team but I had been watching basketball and paying close attention to basketball before I started covering the team. And it shocked me that someone got drafted and there would be whispers out of training camp that the guy just didn't know how to play basketball, like just didn't know how to like execute simple and testament to Vonleh that he stuck with it and didn't let that.
He
like,
played
shatter
last
his
season.
confidence.
He played last season.
I know.
I can't believe
He's
how.
hung around.
I don't know how.
And so that's a testament to guys, especially with his physical tools, just being able to hang in there and figure it out. But yeah, Noah Vonleh.
Last one, All-Star. So there is 8 players who have made the All-Star game while being a member of the Charlotte Hornets / Bobcats. What you need to do is find the player who made an All-Star game while a member of Charlotte to get the best score, who also played the fewest games as a member of the Hornets throughout their career.
The All-Star that played the fewest games. Well, I mean, Gerald Wallace would be an answer that I'm not going to make. I'm not going to make that my final answer, but how many games did he play for the Bobcats? I mean, he played several seasons and was a major player for them. Eddie Jones. Did Eddie Jones make I'm sure he made All NBA, so he had to make an All-Star game. I'll go Eddie Jones.
Doug Branson. Eddie Jones did make an All-Star game, and he is the perfect 0 score for that one because he played 102 games. Second best was LaMelo Ball, who's only played 162 games in his career so far. So Eddie Jones gets the nod. Congratulations for finishing it off brilliantly, and that'll do it. Is he telling us you've got nicknames going on with the Hornets at the moment? What else is happening over there on Locked On Hornets?
Well, so it's a silly season. It's August. We're only doing 3 shows a week, but those 3 shows are magical because we get to dig into some of the history. We get to fool around a little bit. So I'm doing top 35 nicknames, and Walker is doing top 35 players. The reason we're doing this is kind of funny. 5 years ago, the Charlotte Hornets celebrated their 30th anniversary. A lot of pomp and circumstance, bringing players back. Glenn Rice came back. They honored Del Curry. A lot of just like, even though this franchise doesn't have a storied history, it did sell out the Coliseum back in the day over and over again. It was like number 1 in attendance throughout the NBA. So there were things to look back fondly on. And then we got an announcement this season that they were celebrating the 35th anniversary. And I can't tell you why. I don't know why we're doing this, but we are. And so we're embracing it. We're doing top 35. I do want to say one thing about Eddie Jones, that he was 3rd or 2nd team All NBA one season.
Yeah.
And when we look back on Hornets history, if you look at the shooting guard position, it has just not played well for the Charlotte Hornets. They have really just done patchwork around the shooting guard position for their entire 35 years. And so Eddie Jones still to this day, despite playing so few games, still to this day ranks, I would say he would be in contention for the best shooting guard to ever suit it up for the Hornets or Bobcats. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably true. Like, I'm trying to think of other guys. Kendall Gill, but probably wasn't as good as Eddie Jones.
No.
Yeah, look, you're right. There's not David Wesley. He's more of a point guard? Yeah. Like, I don't even know.
It was kind of he played shooting guard, but he was kind of a combo guard guy and a compiler, but certainly was never an all NBA contention, but Wallace was a forward, LJ was a forward, Zoe was a center. They've had some good centers. They've had some good a lot of good point guards, but shooting guard has not been a historic position for them. So that's why Eddie Jones sticks in the old cranium.
There you go. Doug, thank you for coming on, chatting Hornets with me. It's been great. Thank you once again.
Totally. Thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for me today. Don't forget, follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app and on YouTube. Thumb it up and leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.